Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. It is 11 o'clock, and now we're going to get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and everyone, thanks for joining us at the special National Preparedness Month installment of the webinar series put on by Titan HST. My name is Todd DeVoe, and I am the host of Titan HST's Business Continuity Today's podcast, and I'm going to be the moderator of our conversation. And we're super excited for this whole webinar series and for today's program. And we just do have a few announcements before we get started. Titan HST's webinar series is bringing you great speakers, helpful information, and substantial discussions around topics of importance to safety and emergency management. And in case you missed the webinars, we're making these links available in the chat now to Titan HST's YouTube channel, and we'll be sure to send it through and other resources as well through email after this webinar. We want to let you know that the second half of today's session, we're going to take answers and questions, and we encourage everyone to participate with questions for our great guests and put them in the question and answer box so we can put them in the queue to answer. And if you have any quick logistical questions or anything like that, please feel free to use those in the chat. And we have team members over there that can help you out. So now that we've taken care of those business items, we're going to go ahead and jump into this discussion. And I'd like to introduce our guests. Bill Cunningham, as a professional tall ship sailor in U.S. Coast Guard, and that's real sailing there for those of you who have seen those big Navy ships out there. The Coast Guard, he learned the ins and outs of literally hundreds of moving pieces and people working together. And working as a volunteer with the Santa Ana urban area for DHS and the Urban Area Security Initiative brought amazing and rewarding success to bringing businesses together to help each other out. And several businesses and business people realized that it was their responsibility and purpose to help themselves until first responders arrived. And on 9/11/2008, with the help of encouragement of several other leaders, Bill established the BERT Emergency Operations Management. And with his ability and experience to bond all sizes of businesses and all levels of management, the common description of making material come alive, he is a nationally certified emergency operations professional from the ACAC.org. And BERT supports safety teams inside any company or organization to implement and expand their influence to develop culture and safety, the culture of safety, and using state-of-the-art technology in APPs and other training programs. And BERT has grown into a strong, viable resource of OSHA compliance and VPP designation companies. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate the intro.
Absolutely.
Great to be here.
I'd also like to introduce Steve Eberline. Steve and his wife were living in Sri Lanka when a massive tsunami struck the country, taking 35,000 lives there and 200,000 others in communities surrounding the Indian Ocean. And his work on the Lanka tsunami response team took him to every tsunami impacted district where he saw firsthand the toll of disaster that taken unprepared countries and communities. So upon returning to the United States, he learned that his native Pacific Northwest is awaiting a very similar event, the tsunami-generated subduction zone earthquake. And since 2016, he has dedicated his career and his life to disaster preparedness education and advocacy, with a particular focus on communities and workplaces that will be impacted by the Cascadia subduction zone and the San Andreas fault systems. Steve has delivered more than 200 earthquake preparedness presentations, reaching more than 25,000 audience members. And the aim of his work is best embodied in the 2018 TED Talk, where we do not and I love this topic. And this is how Steve and I actually got to meet. And it's why we do not prepare for earthquakes, right? And that's amazing. So if you guys have not seen that TED Talk, you have to take a look at it. And then Steve believes that disaster unpreparedness is a fragile cultural phenomenon that can be undone if enough people step up to the challenge. Steve, I believe that as well. Steve, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Todd. That was an embarrassingly long introduction. I would have cut like 4 sentences off of that, but bless you. Thank you.
I think it's important, like one of the questions I always ask when we have, guests on the show is, how did you get into emergency management? Obviously, your story is right there. But the other question I like to ask right now, especially when we look at this and your idea of unpreparedness and creating wanted to get more people prepared with a anti-fragile community, if you will. What is disaster preparedness to you, Steve?
It's a good question. And something I never thought about whatsoever before Sri Lanka. I'm not the person who went and got an emergency management degree or studied business continuity. It was just not really in my nature to explore the topic before seeing the tsunami arrive in Sri Lanka. And as you mentioned before, having traveled Sri Lanka in the aftermath, one thing became really clear, that the cornerstone of emergency preparedness is actually knowing what to do. Some of the truest things are super trite, and there we go. It's like, if people don't know what to do, they tend to get hurt. So I'll give you some really concrete examples. In Sri Lanka, before the tsunami comes, they had what's called a negative wave, where the ocean essentially completely disappeared before your eyes. And anyone who's studied a little bit about tsunami preparedness would know that if you see the ocean disappear with frantic speed, this is a sign that a tsunami is coming. And this is something that had never been taught clearly on the shores of Sri Lanka or Indonesia or India. And so when people saw this event, in some cases they fled, and in some cases they actually ran towards it. So a cornerstone of emergency preparedness is actually educating people of this is the risk, and this is what you do to avoid the risk and minimize injury and even death. So that's the first thing. And that's what I've been focusing on in the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast is here's the risk and here's what you do about it. The second thing with emergency preparedness is being able to do two things. Everyone should be able to evacuate quickly, be equipped for it, know what it means to evacuate and have the things that you need to evacuate with very little notice. I think everyone needs to be able to shelter in place in case something happens that completely locks you down, be it a massive flood, be it an earthquake. Those are your two basic skills. Can you evacuate? Can you shelter in place? And increasingly, I'm seeing that the third part of emergency preparedness is being ready for complete catastrophic infrastructural meltdown. I'll be honest, when I came back to the Pacific Northwest and I learned that we've got this subduction zone earthquake coming and that it's going to take out running water, flushing toilets, gas heat, electricity, the roads, the hospitals, the police, I thought that was kind of unique to the Pacific Northwest. I became kind of a catastrophe snob. Oh, you in California, you're getting ready for disasters, but you're not getting ready for catastrophes. I've updated that a bit because we can see that the flooding in Jackson, Mississippi has taken out the water supply. We've seen how wildfires lead to either preventative power shutoffs or the power shuts off as a result of wildfire. These things tumble into each other. And I think if you ask the average person, who of course on a daily basis flushes the toilet, uses running water, electricity, Wi-Fi, are you ready? Do you have a backup plan for each and every service that you've used on a daily basis for the last 27 years of your life? Are you ready for the backup of if and when one or all of those goes out? The average person hasn't contemplated that. And it's pretty clear that the average person actually hasn't taken steps for that. That's the third thing. One more thing when it comes to what is emergency preparedness. Emergency preparedness is actually about living within a culture that reinforces it. It's super hard, I think, to keep up any massive life-changing practice if you look around you and you don't see anyone participating in it, right? You don't convert someone to a religion being the only person in that religion, right? It's do you want to join this religion and be the only practicant that you know? Most people don't, right? So the things that actually create change is, yes, believing in the risk, yes, understanding what to do about it, but you need some people around you to actually normalize it. Because nobody likes to feel abnormal. Everyone does have that kind of gut inclination to do what they see people doing around them. And not many people live within a preparedness culture, which is part of the reason I focus on workplaces. Because workplace culture, if you can actually get into a workplace and start shifting the culture of what they consider normal, then the people who are part of those workplaces are more likely to pick up those practices. So those are the 4 pillars of emergency preparedness for me.
Bill, I want to ask you the same question because I know that you're in that workspace as well, and some of the stuff you've been doing with Bert. What is preparedness for you?
Let me just open with saying that I could sit and listen to Steve all day, every day. Boy, that was powerful. I'm eager to look up the TED Talk.
Bill, thank you. That was nice of you. I'll sign off now.
No, please don't. So, emergency preparedness is, in our perspective as we've developed it, is having a plan and a backup, and knowing that the plan and the backup are not going to work. But if you're thinking about a plan and the backup, you're going to likely move forward. Further than that, it's doing something without becoming part of the problem. And if you have to kind of think of those aspects simultaneously, because it's very easy to want to jump in and do something. It's kind of a put me in coach or a Ricky rescue. It's like I've got to do something, and so dive in and do something. But you have to pause and think, is this the best thing to do? Bert's concept is helping train people to take care of an emergency, take care of themselves and their operation and their family in any kind of an emergency, get people out of the way of first responders if they're involved in it, and just get them out of the way. Your only job is getting people out of the way of the first responders. And then when they leave, and they're going to leave a mess that's probably bigger than the original incident. I mean, it's just kind of a fact of life. It's kind of like somebody equated it to a varsity football team when they plow in full pads. They just plow in, they're going to get the job done and then leave. How do you plan to get your business back up to speed as quickly as possible after they leave? So it's taking those 3 aspects. And I got started from in this, and you mentioned the UASI grant. Being a coastie, and I'm a passionate one, as my family knows. If you were looking at my walls, you'd see all the me wall with all the Coast Guard stuff with the ships and everything. When Katrina hit, I really started getting because the coasties were, they had all the helicopters, they were pulling everything. But at the time, I was working for a law firm. I'd been almost 25 years in law firm administration. And a lot of our work, we had a whole collections team, and they were all seemed like collection agencies clustered around New Orleans. And they were in Metairie, which is right outside. Well, as that happened, we wound up with collecting money, and every one of them were gone. There was only one that stayed operational. Every single other collection agency that our firm worked for had disappeared off the planet, and we couldn't even find them to give them the money that was owed. And I realized when I started digging in that 90% of the small businesses in New Orleans failed after Katrina and never came back. And so I started getting an inkling of, the small business is where the real need is. That's where most of our people are. When there's some sort of crisis, catastrophe, emergency incident, let's get those people back up to speed as quickly as possible. And that's where the whole focus went to. So the idea of emergency preparedness is doing something, having some sort of plan, and working it, but not becoming, don't let it take over and become overwhelming. Don't have everybody looking around and doing everything all the time, because then it gets very tiresome. But just kind of work it into, and I think Steve was alluding to this, work it into the culture. Just make this just normal. This is normal operations. This isn't something big and fantastic that we're working toward, and it's not a big plan, and we're doing all these big drills, which you got to do, but just make it the normal part of the operation. And that's where OSHA and FEMA work really well together, because they both have the same kind of concepts.
So Brock Long talked about the idea of creating a culture of preparedness, and I've spoke about this, written about this too in the past, and it seems to me that's where we need to go. And Bill, I'm going to start with you with this. So first of all, I have a 2-part question, so Steve might want to write this down. So what is a culture of preparedness? And then the second part of it is like, how do we develop that? Because I think, Bill, you've done a lot of work in that idea, with Team Rubicon, and then some of the veterans work you've done of building culture around preparedness?
So, and I wrote it down too, Steve, don't feel, so I get to both of them. So the culture is just a matter of shifting thinking to an awareness level. And we do work with like active shooter, and we'll do those kind of things, which are a buzzword, but it's basically the same thing for any kind of an emergency. It's yellow, in the world, yellow is just, green or yellow. People are kind of just lackadaisical, not paying attention to anything. And is that the right place to be? The culture is you start to is situational awareness. And it's just, are you aware of what's going on around you? Whether you walk into a mall, you don't have to be looking around to find exits, but just be aware that, you know what, if something happens, I'm not going to go out the exit that I came in. I'm going to go out the nearest exit. That's just a culture of awareness, situational awareness. And you start to think about, if you're just thinking about things, it starts to resonate with an organization. And if you make things work well from a planning perspective, but you just work it into the operation, rather than just saying, okay, we are having a disaster planning meeting, and this is what we're going to do, and here's our drill, whatever. You just start having conversations, and when you have a tailgate talk, if you're in a facility, just kind of say, hey, look, where would we go here? What would we do? And it just makes it so normal. The culture has to be just normal. And so you've got a few people that just start to normalize situational awareness, because if you're aware of something, then you can react to it. And so I think it's kind of weaving both of those into your question, is that you develop it by just having conversations, and you're going to coffee with a friend and saying, I hadn't noticed that there's an exit sign over there. You're developing the cultural awareness, because that person maybe not has either, because we all know exit signs, you see them all day, every day. You don't even see them anymore. And
Right.
So you just kind of start being aware of what's going on. And so if there's somebody just as simple as an exit sign, there's one over in this area, you then just refer to it. You think about, as I said, like a mall with the family, you just when you go in and just say, hey, look, there's an Old Navy over here. Who goes to malls anymore? I know, but anyway, there's an Old Navy over here, and remember that has an exit right out to the street in an Old Navy. And you just are aware of it, not overbearing. Don't forget, if there's an incident, we're going to go out this store. That doesn't work. That fear aspect doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think is funny about that as well is people get the misnomer of being like super prepared or over prepared, Ricky Rescue type thing, and that's not what we're trying to encourage either. But on the other side of it, you take a look at somebody like, since it's 9/11 anniversary, you take a look at someone like Rick Rescola, who really made a difference in the culture preparedness at Morgan Stanley. So, Steve, I want to ask the same question to you. Like, I know that's one of the things that you really work with some of your customers. How do you develop that culture of preparedness within organizations that you were working with?
So let's put aside culture of preparedness for a second and just focus on the word culture.
Okay.
So we're going to start with like a really simple understanding. Culture is what we understand to be what is expected of us. Okay, that's where we start. Basically, that's how we understand culture. What is expected of me in this given situation? So let's just say, for example, I went to Morocco a couple times when I was young, rented a car and drove through Morocco. Completely ill-advised, especially given my age. But I remember I had an opportunity to have tea with nomads at the edge of the Sahara Desert. And so, okay, there's your situation. You've got a new culture. There are expectations of your behavior, but you don't know what they are. So I'll ask you guys, you don't speak any Arabic. How do you figure out what's expected of you in that situation? You watch other people, right? Right. All I'm doing. I'm watching. When do you sit down? When do you put your tea out? When do you ask for a second cup of tea? What I'm doing, I know that there's a culture in place. I know that there's an expectation that I adhere to it, but I don't know any of the rules. So the way you figure out a culture is to watch other people. But when it comes to a preparedness culture, I feel like the visuals of that expectation are part of what's missing. Because I think what oftentimes happens with any workplace is, preparedness month comes around and everybody says, it's time to get prepared and watch out for tornadoes and drop and cover and hold during radiation leaks or whatever. And then everybody goes back to their business, and the newsletters start to trickle off and all that. And it's a formality in a way. I think the way to take it from a formality of the thing that we should do to an actual culture is there needs to be some visibility. The way to start that visibility, okay, so how do you actually build that preparedness culture? It starts with your leadership. It really does, because if I'm working for a company and I don't actually believe that this is a priority of my leadership, then for me, it becomes optional. Basically, do I believe that this is a good idea for my family? I will do it or I won't. But if you actually have an organization where the leadership, we're talking all the way up to the president, CEO, and the VP level, they are talking to you as a human being about preparedness, about the importance of it in that workplace, and saying directly, this is what we expect of you, and this is why, that's a completely different tenor that you're setting an expectation explicitly. And then the next stage of that is actually encouraging, seeing people in your organization following those behaviors. Again, I'm watching the others in the tent. When did they drink their tea? How much sugar did they use? And I start to acclimate to that. And that can be especially powerful for new employees. That's when to catch them, man. If you already have something of a preparedness culture that your leadership is hammering not just September, but also January and March, as those new employees come in and they start seeing that's your most receptive moment. That moment you walk through the tent to say, oh crap, this is what I need to do. Whether or not I believe in it and whether or not I understand it, I understand that this is the expectation. So how do you build? You build with leadership. Rick Riscola is an excellent example of that. He obviously had the buy-in from his leadership, who I'm sure were not pleased with doing building wide evacuations. And people I'll give another good example at the community level. The best example is Scott James, Bainbridge Island. He wrote Prepared Neighborhoods. I'm going to do a full-on plug for you, Scott, because he really took leadership in that community and said, listen, we're at the front lines of a major tsunami event. We're going to be completely cut off without any services for months. And I'm going to whip this island into shape. We've got some deputies, and he started blowing through the megaphone. It takes leadership. It's not going to happen on its own. So there we go. That's my twofer, I think.
So sticking with that, right, and building the culture preparedness. Next month is the National Great Shakeout Month, right? It used to be the California Great Shakeout, but now it's the nationwide, worldwide, right? You have
international.
Yeah. So, quick plug, we're going to actually have the guy who developed the Great Shakeout on Mark Bentham on next month. So if you guys want to participate in that webinar. Getting people to duck, cover, and hold on during the Great Shakeout, I think it's this year, it's October 20th or something like that at 10:20, right? It's hard, right? And I mean, we've done stuff I've participated, at some schools, higher education, and trying to get students to participate, trying to get the classrooms to participate. It's like pulling teeth sometimes. And UCI did a great thing where they had anybody who took a picture of themselves underneath the desk during that time, took a selfie and posted it. They're giving out candy bars. Now it sounds silly, right? Candy bars to adults, but whatever, people participated by doing it. But how do we get people to not feel embarrassed? Because I think that's what it is. I think it's they're embarrassed about going underneath the desk. How do we get people not to be embarrassed and really participate in something like the Great American Shakeout?
Bill, you want to start?
Sure. So, and I'm going to kind of push back a little bit, Todd, on the idea of candy bars, or tchotchkes or whatever, because we do large OSHA VPP trainings for Valero and Chevron and all of these safety managers love nothing more than to get a pen or a candy bar or something.
It works. That's what I'm saying. It works.
I mean, it really, really works. And don't be afraid of that one. I think one of the biggest challenges that I've always run into is just an honesty is ladies who are in dresses. You know, as skirts. It's like I can't, you know, I can't get down there. It's a little too revealing. And so when we've done those before, we just say, you know, closed-toe shoes and slacks, you know, because it's that. But the thing is, you got to get over it because of literally, if that mindset is there, it's going to be there in the emergency. And so it's a matter of we've got to be respectful. We've got to understand what it is, but we got to get over the hump. That's one of them that I've run into. The other though is that you can also simulate. You know, is because if people don't want to do it, just have them, you know, take and bend over and hold on to their chair. You know, when something is, if it's as long as it's not a roll-around chair, but you know, just simulate what's going on. Is just introduce the concept, and if you're introducing the concept time and time again, then it'll get more and more regular and real. It's when it's thrown in just on the first day, and we're going to all climb underneath the tables, and we're going to get real intimate because there's not enough room under those tables for everyone. You know, it gets out. It has to be a kind of a long-term process. And I'm not a real fan of signs because, again, like I said, the exit signs. But just kind of a Friday thing. We're going to do a safety, you know, 30 seconds. And if we have the Titan app, we're going to do just a quick call out on the Titan app. Are you safe or unsafe? Every Friday at noon. And then this Friday is going to be drop and cover under your desk for 30 seconds. Boom, you know, Friday at noon, it goes off. You just set it out, and then people just start to get more and more comfortable. But I think it's when we wind up throwing too much, too fast, one time at them, and they're not really emotionally prepared for it. Steve?
Okay, I got some thoughts on this too. So when I do presentations, I do a drop, cover, hold drill every time, except for virtual. I like decided people are leaving for the bathroom when I do it virtually. So, but in person, I always do a drill. Couple things. Noise helps, y'all. It's like there are like full like noise like simulators of an earthquake. It needs to be a bit more real. I feel like that's an important part of it. But let me talk about embarrassment. Here's how I frame embarrassment. I don't think the question is how can we keep people from being embarrassed about getting under their table. Let's face it, you feel like a dork, okay? That's like part of it, and that's a normal reaction. So the way I explain embarrassment, and stick with me here, embarrassment is diet fear. So you're going to feel a huge emotion during an actual event, and that emotion is going to be full-on fear that completely short circuits your brain. And what do you do during that moment? You're likely going to be looking to other people,
yes,
to decide how are you going to react, right? You're looking to see what's your desk clump mate doing, what's your boss doing, right? And you make that decision, especially when you're feeling fearful because you're not using the executive, like self-identified parts of your brain. Embarrassment, I feel like, is a really interesting approximation of fear, because embarrassment is, again, a moment that you feel kind of out of water, a moment that you are looking to other people to see how are they dealing with this shared embarrassment. And if you're leading one of these, first of all, find moles, find people in each of those big areas who will go along with you, like prep them beforehand. It's like, I need help, man. So when this happens, would you drop really quickly? Because what we're trying to do is start a domino effect. It's a social, emotional domino effect. It starts with a leader, someone who's just like, this is what we got to do. Bam, you do it. And then the people who are like true believers, they're like, I get it. They've been given permission. It's like, okay, I'm with this guy. And you've got this kind of middle crowd that I would call the reluctantly willing. If you get this critical mass, like maybe 20%, that 50% of reluctantly willing are going to go with it. And then you've got eye rollers. Okay, eye rollers are never going to go along with it. We don't have to worry about them. Okay, there's just like no reaching some people, but they should at least feel like they're in the minority and feel embarrassed for not participating. That's a winning formula. I'm not saying it's easy, y'all, but those are the things I think about when I do earthquake drills.
Yeah, I'll tell you that I know they work because, especially with the kids, that, oh gosh, it must have been 8 years ago now. There was an earthquake that I had by my house. It was like a 5 point something, enough to shake you. And my son, who was in grade school or maybe middle school at the time, grabbed my daughter and went underneath the coffee table, and he, he was little, and we were against the wall, when the shaking was happening, and it was knocking stuff off the shelves. So it was a pretty significant, felt like it was right underneath our house because we were within a mile of the epicenter. So it works, right? I mean, like, he didn't even ask questions. He just knew what to do as a young little guy, being able to pull my baby daughter, who at the time I think was like 2 years old, onto the table. So I thought that was showing how it works. So my point about that story isn't about how great my son is, right? The point of the story is it works, right? Like, teaching kids how to do this, and teaching your people how to do this is critical. And I think that's part of creating the culture. Go ahead, Steve. You want to say?
I've got similar incident with my boys that I took them to an earthquake simulator. Not one of those buckle up ones, but just kind of like a shaky floor simulator at a science museum. I got this great picture of them because you've got like 20 people in this simulator who are like going, whoa, cool. And they're like on their feet and they're like, this is wild. And my two boys are the only two in the whole place. They are like on the floor, they're grabbing the bars, and they're doing it alone. It made me really proud of them because they like, those instincts are to the place. They're like, well, this is of course what we do. I don't care what I see other people doing. And it's like, okay, good. Those are a couple of earthquake leaders right there. You need some, it's got, kids are a great way to, if you raise them right, they're going to be the earthquake leaders in the future.
So
let me jump in. Yeah, just real quick, because your point, especially with the moles, is so critical, and that works very well. But the other one that kind of dovetails with it, not to get off on tangent at all, but in our active shooter training, what we'll do is say, if somebody breaks into the room, you start throwing things at them. And if you only have a couple of people, because if things are being thrown at the shooter, they can't process. That's one of the exercises we go through. But the idea is that if a couple of people do it, other people are just going to step up and do it as well. They're going to get it and start, following, the leaders that you were talking about, because that's what's, it's following those leads that are so important. The tough part is, again, when you have this, I go to veteran events, and we've been doing a lot of virtual events, and the challenge is we'll always stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, when you're virtual and you stand for a Pledge of Allegiance, unfortunately, it's not a real good sight on the camera. Because you're looking at somebody's belt buckle. And so, so it's one of those things of getting people comfortable, preparing them for it, ahead of time, so that they have some concept as well that I want to just jump in with. But great concept, Steve. Thanks.
So let's put this in the context, because, like, with my kids and Steve's kids, they're young and they're in school and they're participating, and they tend to be a little bit moldable, if you will. Or, well, how do we do this with adult? How do we do this at the business level? Because at the end of the day, that's really what is the question: is how do we get our organizations prepared and create that culture preparedness within the organization? Like what's the first step? I mean, I know Steve and Billy both said get the bosses involved, but I mean, like, that's cool. And one of the things I saw, and one more thing, I'll add this in there, and then you guys go. Is I've seen at different places, I talked about this morning on Business Continuity Today, is that potty training. It's like they put the flyers in the urinal stalls or in the stalls in the bathroom. So when you're sitting there doing your thing, you have that training in front of your face. Things like that I think are kind of interesting. But like, how do we get the people to participate? You said, Steve, there's a percentage of them that just aren't going to play. Like, so does that mean we just forget about them and they're just done, or what? Steve, why don't you take that one?
Do we leave the eye rollers behind? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So I think that when a real event happens, I feel like the eye rollers are going to participate as they're expected to, especially when they see the majority of people doing it. I feel like you focus on, for a drill, you focus on getting to over 50% participating. Because again, that's a critical mass that will have a huge visual impact on the behavior of all people. As soon as you can get somewhere over that 50%, you normalize that response during the actual event. The other thing that, so kind of getting beyond the shakeout, something that I feel is just missing, and it feels so obvious, especially for a place being ready for an earthquake, say a workplace getting ready for an earthquake, there's no signage in workplaces. So for example, you're not always going to be in front of a desk or a table, right? What if you're in the hallway? And why isn't there a sign that says, in case of earthquake, get against this wall on the ground, as opposed to against that plate glass window? Or if you're in the cafeteria, to point you away from, please do not be near these racks during an earthquake, get under this spot. There should be like visual clues on an ongoing basis to remind people that we don't always have earthquakes when you're at your desk or in front of your dining room table, right? We don't make it as realistic as it needs to be. I think what I tell people is that you spend 95% of your time in probably the same places, right?
Mhm.
Home, work, car, these certain spots you're building. Ask yourself, what would you do if there's an earthquake right now in this spot? What's the appropriate response? I feel like signage actually within workplaces, whether it be for an earthquake or tornado, to help people start thinking about what their personal decision would be, is going to be one other way to lead to the right results, even amongst the eye rollers. The biggest danger is you haven't thought about it before the event. Then you're caught completely off guard. It quadruples the fear. I think some signage could really help getting people to think about it.
Real quick, Thomas chimed in. I know we talked a little bit about this, and he says that he likes to talk about Rick Roscola at Morgan Stanley, and that's a great way to get the right mindset for preparedness. And Thomas, I think the three of us agree with you 100% on that. But that made me think of something. When we think about spending money on these events and Earthquake Preparedness Month, I think it's worth it. Maybe even buying like Amanda Ripley's book on the unthinkable, or books like along those lines, where people can get them, read them, and digest them, and look at real life stories. Because I think we tend to abstract our problems, right? We talk about the Cascadia event, and those of us in the know understand it. But then you have those that go, okay, whatever, that doesn't really make sense to me. But if you read real stories, and the other one I think of too is the nightclub in, I think it was in Massachusetts, where everybody tried to go out the same door, and hundreds of people died. And there was the exit doors that were nearby were emptied. So
and also in Amanda Ripley's book, same book, Todd, the story of that fire that went through the supper club.
Oh, the Hollywood Supper Club.
Yeah.
And people didn't react.
Right.
I think that's a really interesting, that's another like viral reaction that no one sees coming unless they've seen it themselves. That underreaction is a very common reaction, because nobody wants to be the panicker, because we actually still have the ability to carry social shame, even in life and death situations. And panicking is a bad response. And so viral underreaction is also an interesting problem. Bill, I think, go ahead.
I wanted to jump back though, because one of the other things about developing it is, and it goes to Rick Roscola, the management has to be involved. And Todd and you and I talked about this the last time you and I were together. Management has to be involved. Management has to address it, but you have to have an advocate. somebody who's going to take on the mantle inside the organization. And whether it's a secretary or, safety manager or whomever, somebody has to take that and then start to do the development, starting to work on it. Because if there's no leadership in an emergency situation and to doing the planning and doing the setup, the executives are not going to do that. You may have one that's in there, but they're going to endorse it. That's what happened with Briscola. The executives endorsed and said Briscola is the man and he's the one you should go for. But there was a Rick Briscola who was not on that level. And so it's important that any organization have somebody and identify somebody that's going to kind of run with the project and let it develop. And that's, from our perspective, is find who that person is, who has a little bit of passion, who has the look in the eye. And we do, and in the CERT classes that we teach, we talk about a school bus, and kids are getting off a school bus and you're helping them. You can look at the kids and see which one is engaged and looking around. You grab that person and put them to work, rather than the ones that are panicking or that are just blind or whatever. But you get there's always a person or two who is really engaged, and they could be one of the younger ones. Pull them over to the side. I'm sure it's going to be both of your sons are going to be, those kids, but pull them over to the side and put them to work, because you can see the thought process, and having that's critical.
I want to reemphasize what you said, Bill, and then put a cherry on top of what you brought up, Todd. So yes, the leadership, we've talked about that many times. I've talked a lot about the social aspect of doing the right thing. But kind of getting back to Amanda Ripley and Rick Briscola, I think the piece that we're flirting with is actually making people believe that this is useful and necessary. Rick Briscola, and I'm sure your viewership knows what Rick Briscola did during 9/11 to evacuate Morgan Stanley in a completely precarious situation. And that the drilling that took place before that is largely to credit for their successful response when those planes hit tower number 2. And I think another good example specific to the shakeout is Mexico. Mexico City had earthquakes September 19th, 2017, September 19th, 1985. They commemorate the 1985 earthquake every single year by doing a citywide earthquake drill, which means that they actually had done a large earthquake drill just hours before the earthquake of 2017.
Yes.
And listen, there are a lot of things that are different about these earthquakes. Okay, if you've gone to Wikipedia, you're going to argue with me all day, but here's the takeaway. The 1985 earthquake resulted in 10,000 deaths, and the 2017 earthquake resulted in about 350 deaths. Again, there are a lot of factors to explain that difference, but people being on the same page and participating in a shared action certainly played dividends in that 2017 earthquake.
One of the problems I think that we have as Americans specifically is, it's a good thing and a bad thing, I suppose, double-edged sword, is we have short memories, right? We don't have that institutional memory that we give passed down between generations to generation. And even with 9/11, as we say, we'll never forget. Those of us that witnessed it that day and lived through it probably won't. But I mean, for the majority of the the next generation coming up, it's still something from the history books. And if you think about September, if you think about December 7th, right, Pearl Harbor Day, my parents and grandparents lived through it, but I remember it because I'm a Navy guy, and oh yeah, it's this thing. But I think the majority of the population doesn't. How do we lengthen that memory, the collective memory, for disasters such as like what Mexico did with Mexico City earthquake? Go ahead, Steve.
Can I start?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I love that. This is such a great question, and it's part of the reason that I lean on culture as the answer, because memory is short. We can't be expected to keep up the anxiety of the aftermath of the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, or the 1989 Loma Prieta event, or Katrina. We just don't have the emotional steam to keep that heightened level of readiness. But what we do naturally know how to do as humans is to change our culture. We're a country that we wash and change our culture with absolute breakneck speed. It's absolutely shocking how quickly we're able to go over 7 years and say, remember what we did 7 years ago? That was garbage. We are completely different now in these ways. Here we go. Where culture adjusts and people adjust with culture. And that's why I always lean on culture. It's like, memory fades. Culture, though, if you can get culture going the right direction, it'll stick with you. And part of the reason I believe in that in a big way is during the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami, there was a tribe in the Andaman Islands, a tribe that's been on this certain island, let's say it's North Sentinel Island. They've been continuously inhabiting it for 70,000 years. They probably had about 30 minutes between the actual earthquake and the arrival of the first massive tsunami. They were very front lines, and they had 0 casualties. The reason that they obviously didn't have casualties is because year after year, they have been passing down knowledge of what you do and talking to each other. I mean, they're receiving the information of what you do during an earthquake event. You go high ground because the tsunami's coming. They're passing that down to each other year after year after year. And it's been normalized by that culture. I don't know if they stand around like really anxious that the next earthquake's coming, because I think they had gone generations without a tsunami.
Right.
About the time that the 2004 event happened. What saved them was not preparedness. What saved them actually was their culture. And so if you focus on culture and you can change the culture can save you. Unfortunately, right now, we have a culture that isn't equipped to save us. So we try to put preparedness band-aids on the problem. Culture's job is to get us to behave in a way that is compliant with our survival. And we don't naturally do that.
Well, we're opposite here, right? I mean, like when we have a tsunami warning coming in, especially here in California, people come to the coast because they want to see it. It's the weirdest thing, right? They drive down to the coast to take a look at it, and then let's contrast that with Japan, not the American experience, but the experience you were talking about with Japan. They have written stone, don't build past this level, right? And the Japanese dismissed it and built past that level. And when the Japanese tsunami happened, everything below those stones were destroyed and everything above it, survived. So it's not just Americans that don't listen to the past as well. But I find that interesting. Like when we have the tsunami warning going, and we had, I witnessed it was a very small tsunami, right? And it was a tsunami nonetheless. But we still had the subduction and it came back in, and the water was very dangerous to be in. So we closed the beaches down. It made the beach look like a washer machine if you kind of put that into your head the way it looked. But people came to the beach to view it. If we had the king tide, which was the next day, I was talking to some of the scientists, we would have been talking about a different type of event. And those people that came down probably would have lost their cars, not necessarily their lives, but their cars would have been flooded out, where they parked. So I just find it interesting that I don't know if we're looking disaster in the eye necessarily, but we don't take heed to it. That's for sure. So Bill, why is it? Why do we tend to send people? Why do people tend to come to the disaster zone instead of run away from it?
Well, and I think it's behind me is a map of Anguilla, is an island country that was hit by Hurricane Ida, and the eye went over it. At one point, it took everything on the island and destroyed it, and then the eye went over and everything reversed, blew it all out to sea. So it was literally, amazing how it happened. And we had several clients that were there. But the point is, you sit there and say we had 19 clients on the island, and none of them actually even came back. Even though there was one that demonstrated they saved over $1 million, but because they said we survived, and there's so much survival. And I think what Steve alluded to in the two things with Mexico City is that we're getting better as a general society to survive. But when you look at like Paradise, the Paradise fire, and you look at the fire now that's happening in Hemet, those are people, they get complacent thinking the government's going to take care of us. And that's what Anguilla did. And that's what's happening so much, that the government will take care of us. We're going to have it. When we look back and say, wait a minute, if you don't have power or flushing toilets, for a month, how much of that is going to happen, or 2 months or 3 months. So the complacency comes from a comfort level of survival. It's like, well, we don't really see the people that died. With the Paradise Fire, they did some. If it bleeds, it leads. We know in the media, they did some, but they didn't equate it to what can happen here. And that's where I think that's the challenge, is that that could easily happen through Irvine. They'll say, oh, we have tile roofs, so it wouldn't happen. Those were all wood shake roofs, and that's so everybody justifies why it's not going to happen where they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have about 10 minutes left. And anybody, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put those into the Q&A area. I want to give each of you a chance to just kind of talk about what you do a little bit more, and if people are interested. Bill, we'll go with you. What are you guys working on right now, and how do people find you?
Well, yeah, thanks so much. Our company is BERTinc.org, BERTinc.org. We're an OSHA compliance and emergency preparedness organization. We have OSHA outreach trainers. We also have emergency operations professionals. So what's interesting is that we meld the two, OSHA compliance and FEMA, together, because in our mind, a safety team in the OSHA world and an emergency team are literally the same people. And an emergency is basically, any kind of OSHA incident is an emergency. And so the two work together. And that's what we try to do with our clients, is get those two melding together. So you've got emergency team and a safety team coming together. There's a couple of handouts that we've offered that people can have a continuity plan that is going forward to be able to just kind of start to put your business together, but then also a self-check as to how ready are you? OSHA's, people talk about it being, kind of like the IRS. OSHA is really good. They have some good stuff. And we come up with some checklists from an emergency perspective that you can check and see where do you fall in the OSHA compliance, because it literally moves right over into the emergency compliance as well. So
absolutely.
That's where.
Thank you, Bill. And Steve, same question. How can people find you, and what do you got all about now?
I am the workplace resilience manager at Ethos Preparedness. And what our company does, it's very much about material disaster and catastrophe preparedness. So we have devices to help you evacuate non-ambulatory people from buildings during a disaster. We've got kits and containers to help people equip themselves as they evacuate from the building. Should be like a post-earthquake event and everybody's like running home, which isn't necessarily what you should do, but we make sure that people have grab and go bags. They're like ready to roll. And we also help companies. This is kind of an exciting new part of our offering. We help large companies get their campuses ready for large shelter-in-place efforts. So if you're asking yourself the question, it's like, how am I going to feed 5,000 people for 2 weeks? We're a company that is coming up with those solutions and also the materials for essentially, I hate to put it this way, corporate refugee camps. So we work with companies that are in catastrophe zones. They're really concerned about taking care of 100, 1,000, or 10,000 people.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Bill, both of you for being here today as we discuss this important topic of preparedness and what it means to be ready, especially when it comes into corporations and into offices and schools and all that. Because at the end of the day, it is important for us to really be leading this charge, if you will. And as Steve and Bill said during their sessions, that we really need to have leadership to be involved in it. But it also starts with you, those of you that are listening to this today. It starts with you to be able to pick up the mantle and talk to your C-suite and get them to buy in, because disasters aren't just on the coasts, right? It's everywhere. If you're in the Midwest, You have tornadoes. If you're in the southeast, you have hurricanes. If you're in the northeast, you have snowstorms and floods all abound. If you look at the news anywhere, you see disasters. So we need to really have that culture of preparedness across the country, and it starts with you. And I appreciate everybody who spent time with us this morning. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us here at Titan HST for your communication needs. You can find us at webinars at titanhst.com, or you can also check us out at titanhst.com and book a demo, and would love to see you there. Until next time, everybody, please stay safe, stay hydrated.